Anna's fingers had already stopped feeling the cold when she heard hoofbeats stop outside the cabin door. She didn't call out. She couldn't. Her throat had locked itself shut somewhere around midnight when the temperature dropped low enough that her breath came out in small, desperate clouds, and Samuel stopped crying. Not because he was better, but because he was too cold to make a sound. She had pulled him inside her coat, pressed him flat against her chest, and told herself that if she could just feel his heartbeat, everything was still possible. She was still telling herself that when the door opened, if you've ever felt like someone promised you a future and handed you a grave instead, then this story is for you. Stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens to Anna and her baby boy is something I still think about. And before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to Montana. And a woman who refused to die. Anna Whitaker had made exactly one mistake in her 25 years of life, and she had made it with her whole heart. She had believed a man's words, not his actions, not his history, not the way his letters arrived, a little too perfectly timed, a little too full of the exact phrases a lonely woman needed to hear. She had believed the words themselves, held them up like lanterns in the dark, and followed them west across nearly 2,000 miles of railroad track, muddy road, and frozen prairie, until she arrived at a place that looked nothing like the home he had described. Thomas Granger's ranch sat at the far end of a valley in Montana Territory, and from a distance it had the bones of something that could have been beautiful. Wide land, strong fencing, a main house with a covered porch. But beauty and a good first impression are two different things, and Anna knew the difference the moment Thomas opened his front door and looked not at her face, but past her straight at the bundle she carried against her chest. "That's the baby," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't even surprise. It was the sound a man makes when he's been caught hoping something had gone away on its own. "Yes," Anna said. "This is Samuel. I told you about him in my very first letter." "You did," Thomas said. He stepped back and let her in, and that was the last kind thing he did for a very long time. Anna had not come to Montana weak. She wanted to be clear about that, not to herself, not to anyone else who might later try to write her story as a rescue story from the very beginning. She had spent the last year and a half raising Samuel alone after his father walked out before the boy ever drew his first breath. She had worked 2 jobs in Columbus, Ohio, kept a clean room in a boarding house, fed her son on what she earned, and answered Thomas Granger's advertisement in the Agricultural Gazette, because she was practical, not desperate. There was a difference. Desperation makes you grab at any hand that reaches out. Practicality makes you reach back only after you've weighed what you're likely to receive. She had weighed. She had written 6 careful letters. She had read 8 of Thomas's careful responses. He knew about Samuel. He said in plain language, she still remembered word for word, that a child was not a complication, but a beginning, that a boy needed a father, and a father needed a son, and he'd be honored to provide both. He had written the word honored. She remembered because she'd read it 3 times. The first morning at the Granger Ranch, Thomas handed her a list. It was written in pencil on a folded piece of brown paper, and it covered both sides. Breakfast at 5:30. Eggs from the coop, not the pantry supply. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. House swept before the ranch hands arrived. Laundry hung before noon. Dinner at 6 sharp. Accounts updated every Friday. Anna looked at the list, then looked at Thomas, who was already pulling on his coat to head out to the barn. "Where does Samuel sleep?" she asked. Thomas paused at the door. "Back room." "Is there a crib?" "There's a crate I used for tools. You can clean it out." She cleaned it out. She laid her folded coat in the bottom and put Samuel down in it, and then she cooked Thomas's breakfast and swept his floor and hung his laundry, and she did it all with her jaw set and her eyes clear, because she had decided on the train west that she would give this situation every honest chance it deserved before she made any final judgments. The final judgment came faster than she expected. It came in pieces. Thomas ate his meals without speaking to her. He answered her questions with single words. When Samuel cried during the night, and Samuel cried the way all 6-month-old babies cry, with complete dedication and no awareness of social convention. Thomas would appear in the hallway, not to offer help, but to stand there in the lamplight with an expression that was somewhere between contempt and calculation. And then he would disappear back into his room without a word. By the 4th day, he stopped pretending. "The baby cried again last night," he said over the breakfast she'd placed in front of him. "He's teething," Anna said. "I've been walking him in the back room so the noise doesn't carry." "It carries," Thomas said. "I need my sleep. I run a working ranch." "I understand that," Anna said. "I'll do my best." "Your best," Thomas said, and his voice carried something in it she couldn't name right away. Something flat and ugly, like a board with a nail hidden underneath, wasn't what I was looking for. Anna set down her fork. "I beg your pardon. I said I wanted a wife," Thomas said. "Someone who could manage a house and be useful. I didn't sign up to raise somebody else's problem." The word hit her, the way cold water hits you when you're not expecting it. Not painful exactly, but shocking enough that her whole system went still for a moment. She looked at the man across the table and understood for the first time the full shape of what she'd walked into. "Samuel is not a problem," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "He is my son." "He's your burden," Thomas said. "And I won't have it under my roof." "Then tell me what you'd like me to do," Anna said, and the way she said it made it clear she was not asking for direction. She was giving him one last chance to hear himself. Thomas stood up, leaving half his breakfast on the plate. "Figure it out," he said. "I've got work." I went out the door, and Anna sat at his table in his house in the middle of his valley, at the edge of the world, and she did not cry. She thought about crying briefly, and then she thought about Samuel asleep in the back room, in a wooden crate lined with her coat, and she decided to make a plan instead. For 3 more days, she made plans. She cataloged what she had: a small bag of clothing, a change of clothes for Samuel. $11 she'd kept hidden in the lining of her traveling bag, because her mother had told her the day Anna left Ohio that a woman should always keep something her husband doesn't know about. She had 2 letters from Thomas, specific ones, the ones where he'd mentioned Samuel by name and used the word welcome. She folded those letters small and tucked them in with the money. She was thinking about whether she could make it to Millhaven, the nearest town, if she could somehow get transport, when Thomas solved the problem for her in a way she never anticipated. On the 7th morning, the sky was heavy and gray, the kind of sky that means business in Montana. In January, Thomas appeared at the kitchen door while she was nursing Samuel and announced he was going to town for supplies. "I'll need the wagon," he said. "Got a list at the mercantile." "Of course," Anna said. "Should be back by nightfall," he said. "There's wood stacked. Don't let the stove go out." "I won't," she said. He looked at her, then really looked at her, the way you look at something you're planning to leave behind, and she thought for one moment that he might say something human. Something that acknowledged that she was a person who had traveled 2,000 miles on his word, and deserved at the very minimum an honest conversation. What he said was, "Make sure the chickens are put up before dark, storm coming." Then he left. Anna fed Samuel, put him in the crate, and went out to collect the morning eggs. That was when she noticed the wagon track. It went the wrong direction. Thomas had said he was going to Millhaven, which was east. The track went northwest toward the mountain pass. She went back inside and stood very still in the middle of the kitchen. Then she checked the pantry. The bulk of the dry goods were gone. The salt pork. The flour barrel, half empty yesterday, was now completely empty. The coffee tin. The 2 bottles of medicine she'd brought from Ohio for Samuel's teething gone, because they'd been sitting on the pantry shelf, and Thomas wouldn't have known the difference between them and cooking supplies if he was clearing things out in a hurry. She went to the back room where she kept her bag. The $11 and the letters were still there, because she'd sewn them into the lining herself, and Thomas had never looked at her bag that carefully. But she already knew what she was going to find when she went out to the barn. The barn was empty. Thomas had taken his 2 best horses and left the oldest one, a gray mare with a bad leg, and he'd taken the saddle, so the only way she could put the mare to use was bareback, and she'd never ridden bareback in her life, and there was a storm coming, and Samuel was 6 months old. Anna stood in the barn doorway and looked at the sky for a long moment. Then she went inside, wrapped Samuel in every layer she had put on both her dresses and her coat and her one good pair of gloves, packed her bag with the essentials, and tried to think. She could stay in the ranch house. But Thomas had clearly taken enough supplies to suggest he wasn't planning to return, and if the storm hit hard, she could be stranded for days or weeks with no food and no fuel, beyond what was already stacked, and no one who knew she was there. Nobody in Millhaven knew she existed. She had no family in Montana. She had no name here, no history, no one who would come looking. She could try to take the mare. But the mare's leg was bad enough that a hard ride in frozen weather risked the animal collapsing, and if that happened 3 miles from anywhere, she and Samuel were finished. What she could do, what seemed in that particular moment of brutal clarity, like the only move available, was follow the tree line north, where she'd seen smoke 3 days ago from what looked like another property. She'd asked Thomas about it, and he'd said it was Cole land, that Nathan Cole owned half the North Valley, and wasn't a man who appreciated visitors, and she'd let the subject drop. But smoke meant people. People meant a stove and 4 walls and the possibility of surviving the night. She put Samuel against her chest, inside her coat, fastened the top buttons, picked up her bag, and walked out into the gray January morning. She walked for what felt like forever, and was probably closer to 2 hours. The wind started about 40 minutes, in which meant the storm was moving faster than the sky had suggested, and by the time she reached the first line of coal fencing, she could see her breath turning to ice crystals before it finished, leaving her mouth. Samuel had stopped fussing. That was the thing that scared her most. Not the cold on her own face, not the numbness creeping up from her feet, but Samuel going quiet against her chest, his small body still, but not the right kind of still. She found the cabin by luck or by God, or by some combination of both. A line rider's shelter, barely bigger than a storage shed, tucked against a stand of pines. She got the door open, got inside, got the door shut. There was a small iron stove, no wood. A shelf with a tin cup and nothing else. A wood crate in the corner which she tipped on its side and used as a windbreak in the corner farthest from the door. She sat down in that corner with Samuel inside her coat and talked to him. She talked about Ohio. She talked about the smell of the bakery 2 streets over from their boarding house. She talked about the train ride west, which had been genuinely beautiful in places. She told him about the mountains she'd seen from the window, the way the light hit the snow-covered peaks in the early morning. She talked because talking kept her awake, and because Samuel needed to hear her voice, and because silence in that cabin felt too much like something ending. She didn't know how long she'd been there when she heard the hoofbeats. She didn't call out. She'd learned in the past week that calling out to someone didn't always bring help. Sometimes it just confirmed your location to someone who wanted to leave you behind. So she stayed where she was, back against the wall. Samuel pressed to her chest, and she waited. The door opened. The man who stood in the doorway was tall enough that he had to duck to clear the frame. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat with snow collected on the brim. Behind him she could see a horse steam coming off its sides, and 2 other horses further back, which meant he'd brought riders. He looked at her. She looked at him. He pulled off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Nathan Cole. This is my land." His voice was low and careful, the kind of voice that had learned to deliver bad news without flinching. And for a moment, Anna's heart sank, because she was trespassing on a man's property with a half-frozen baby and no legal right to be anywhere in the territory of Montana. "I can see from the tracks outside you walked here from the direction of the Granger property." He paused. "Is Thomas Granger your husband?" "How is supposed to be?" Anna said. Her voice came out rough, and she realized her throat had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten what her own voice sounded like. "We had a marriage arrangement. He brought me from Ohio. Then he left." Nathan Cole looked at her for a long moment. He was not, she noticed, distantly looking at her, the way Thomas had looked at her, as a calculation, as a set of utilities to be assessed. He was looking at her the way a person looks at another person. "How long have you been in here?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Hours. The storm came faster than I expected." His eyes dropped to the bundle inside her coat. "How old is the baby?" 6 months, she said. "His name is Samuel. He's very cold and he's stopped crying, which I know is not a good sign. So if you're going to do something helpful, I'd appreciate it being soon." Something moved across Nathan Cole's face. Not quite a smile, but a recognition, like he'd just heard something he hadn't expected, and found it more useful than whatever he'd been prepared for. He turned back to the doorway and said, "Holt, come take the bag. Rivers, bring the extra horse up to the door." Then he turned back to her and said, "Can you stand?" "Yes," she said. "Then let's get that baby warm," he said. She stood up, and she was steadier than she expected to be, which she counted as a small victory. She followed him to the door, and he stepped aside to let her pass. First, a courtesy so automatic she could tell it had been built into him before he ever had the chance to think about it. And then they were outside in the driving snow. And one of his riders, a stocky man with a kind face, was taking her bag, and Nathan Cole was helping her onto the spare horse with a practicality that had nothing performative about it. "It's about a mile to the main house," he said, settling back onto his own horse. "Keep your head down and follow close." "Mr. Cole," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, like thanks was something he received at face value without needing to expand on it, and then he clicked to his horse and they rode. The ranch house was everything the Granger property had only looked like from a distance. It was large without being showy, built in the way that Montana structures were built by people who understood that beauty was a byproduct of function, not the other way around. The covered porch ran the full length of the front. The barn behind it was 3 times the size of Thomas's. Lights were burning in the windows when they rode in, and a woman Anna didn't recognize, older, wide through the shoulders, with the bearing of someone who ran things, appeared in the doorway before they'd even tied the horses. "Holt sent ahead," Nathan said to the woman by way of explanation. "This is Mrs." He stopped and looked at Anna. "Whitaker," she said. "Anna Whitaker." "Mrs. Whitaker," Nathan said. "She and her boy need warming up. Baby first." The woman. Anna would later learn her name was Dot, and that she had worked at the Cole Ranch for 11 years and knew the property better than Nathan did himself. Looked at Anna with the frank assessment of someone deciding very quickly whether a situation required alarm or management. She apparently decided on management. "In here," she said and held the door. Anna carried Samuel inside. The heat of the main room hit her like a wall, the good kind of wall, the kind you want to walk into and never leave. Dot took Samuel from her, and Anna let him go, which was the measure of how much she trusted the woman's hands, because Anna had not let Samuel out of her arms voluntarily since the morning she discovered the empty barn and unwrapped him on the kitchen table and made sounds Anna couldn't fully decode as she checked him over. "He's cold, but he's not hurt," Dot said, after a moment that lasted approximately forever. "He needs warming up slow and some food in him if he'll take it." She looked at Anna. "You got milk?" "Yes," Anna said. "I just need—" She stopped. She needed to sit down, was what she needed, and she needed to stop holding herself so carefully because the effort of it was catching up with her, but she didn't want to do either of those things in front of a stranger. Nathan Cole appeared from somewhere behind her and set a chair near the stove without comment, and Anna sat down in it, and Dot handed Samuel back, and Anna pulled the baby close and held him, while the warmth of the room began slowly and mercifully to return feeling to things that had stopped feeling. Nathan sat across the room at the kitchen table. He had his hat off and his coat off, and she could see him more clearly now. Somewhere in his early 40s, she thought, with the kind of face that didn't hide what it had been through, but hadn't let it make things bitter either. There was a stillness about him that wasn't coldness. It was more like patience. The patience of someone who had decided a long time ago that most things worth having required waiting for. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Longer if the storm doesn't break." "I don't want charity," Anna said immediately. He looked at her. "I know that," he said. "I wasn't offering it." She studied him. "What were you offering?" "A warm room and a meal," he said. "Same as I'd offer anyone caught out in a January storm on my property." He paused. "But if you're asking about beyond tonight, that's a different conversation, and I'm not inclined to have it until you've slept and your boy has eaten." It was, Anna thought, one of the most reasonable things anyone had said to her in months, maybe longer. Samuel had begun to stir against her chest. Small movements, the first real movements since the cabin, and she felt something loosen in her that she hadn't known was clenched. He was going to be all right. He was cold and shaken and hungry, but he was going to be all right, and she was going to be all right, and whatever came next was going to require thought and planning, and probably a measure of courage. She wasn't entirely sure she had left, but she was going to find it. She had found it before. Dot put a bowl of something hot on the table beside her beans, and salt pork simple, and exactly right, and a cup of coffee, and a smaller bowl of warm water with a clean cloth, and she said, "Eat first, then wash up. I'll heat the back room." "Thank you," Anna said. Dot looked at her the way some older women look at younger women they've decided to respect. "You walked 2 miles in a January blizzard with a nursing baby," she said, "with nothing but the coat on your back." She shook her head. "Ed, you don't need to thank me for a bowl of soup." Anna ate. Samuel nursed. The stove put out heat that seemed to reach into the bones of the room and stay there. Across the kitchen, Nathan Cole sat with a cup of coffee and a ledger. He wasn't reading, and Anna had the sense that he was giving her the space to simply exist without being assessed or catalogued or found wanting, and that this too was a form of kindness, quieter than a blanket or a bowl of food, but no less real. When Samuel was settled, and Dot had taken him to show her the back room, Anna remained in the kitchen for a moment. Nathan was still at the table. He'd made no move to send her anywhere or end the evening. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Nathan," he said without looking up from the ledger. "Nathan." She tried the word. It fit the room better than the formality had. "What made you check the cabin today?" He looked up then. "I rode that line every day in winter," he said. "Storm coming in, I was checking my fence posts. I saw tracks from the Granger Road that went toward the cabin instead of continuing north, and they were—" He stopped. "They were small tracks," he said. "Too small for a man walking, and they went slower than someone in a hurry." He paused again. "I've seen scared tracks before," he said finally. "They have a particular look to them." Anna thought about what her tracks must have looked like in the snow. The irregular spacing. The places where she'd stumbled. The spot probably where she'd stopped and stood still for too long, debating whether to go back. "I'm glad you ride your fence line," she said. "So am I," said Nathan Cole. Outside, the storm had hit in full. It shook the windows and pressed against the walls and howled under the eaves with the kind of commitment that suggested it had been building up to this for a long time. Inside the main house of the Cole, the lamps burned steady, and the stove held its heat, and Anna Whitaker sat in a chair by the fire with her son, asleep against her shoulder, and her $11 and 2 letters still sewn into the lining of her traveling bag, and her whole impossible situation still ahead of her, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of it. Not because someone had rescued her. Not because the road ahead was clear, but because she had walked 2 miles in a Montana blizzard with her child against her chest, and she had found a door and opened it, and whatever she'd thought she'd lost somewhere between Ohio and the empty Granger barn, she still had the most important part of it. The part that kept moving. The part that refused. The part that even in a freezing line. Cabin with no wood and no food and no plan and no name in this territory that anyone knew had kept talking to her baby about the mountains she'd seen from the train window, because she had decided not consciously, not as a plan, but as the kind of decision that lives below thought and keeps a person upright, that there was still something worth describing to him. That there was still something worth seeing. The storm raged all night, and Anna Whitaker slept for the first time in a week without listening for footsteps in the hall. She woke before the storm broke. Samuel was still sleeping against her chest, his breathing even and steady. And for a moment, Anna lay completely still in the unfamiliar bed, in the unfamiliar room, and listened to the wind against the walls, and let herself believe that the past week had been a nightmare she was only now waking from. Then the smell of wood smoke and coffee reached her, and the sound of boots moving quietly across a wood floor somewhere in the house, and she remembered exactly where she was, and exactly how she had gotten there, and she got up. Dot had laid out warm water the night before. Anna washed her face and hands, changed Samuel's wrappings with the clean cloth Dot had left folded on the dresser, and braided her hair back the way she always did when she was preparing to be useful. She had nothing else to put on. Her 2 dresses had dried overnight, draped over the chair near the stove, and the one she'd slept in was crumpled but warm, so she put on the outer dress over it, picked up Samuel, and went to find the kitchen. Nathan was already at the table. He had a cup of coffee and a stack of paper in front of him, and he was writing something in a hand that was smaller and more careful than she'd expected from a man his size. He looked up when she came in, and his expression didn't shift into anything welcoming or performing. He just looked at her, the way you look at someone you've already decided is allowed to be in your kitchen, and then he looked back down at his paper. "Coffee's on," he said. "Thank you," Anna said. She poured a cup, settled Samuel on her hip, and stood for a moment looking out the window at the white landscape the storm had left behind. The sky was clear now, sharp and cold and very blue, and the snow lay thick and unmarked across everything as far as she could see. "Storm broke around 4, Nathan said without looking up. "Roads will be passable by midday if it stays clear." Anna turned from the window. "I need to go to Millhaven," she said. "I need to find work and a place to stay. I have some money, not much, but enough to get started if I'm careful." Nathan set down his pen. "What kind of work?" "Whatever's available," she said. "I can cook. I can keep accounts. I did the books for a dry goods store in Columbus for 2 years. I sew. I can manage a household." She paused. "I learn fast." He studied her for a moment. "Millhaven's got a hotel and a general store and a post office," he said. "Population just under 300. The hotel might need help in the kitchen. Might not. The general store owner is a widower who can't keep a clerk more than 2 weeks because he's disagreeable." He paused. "You'd have to find a room, and rooms in Millhaven in January are not cheap and they are not warm." "I've managed cold before," Anna said. "You have," he said. "I'm not arguing that." He picked up his pen again, turned it in his fingers. "I have a different suggestion if you're willing to hear it." Anna waited. "I need someone to manage this house," Nathan said. "Dot runs the kitchen and she does it better than anyone I've ever employed. But the household accounts are a disaster, and I haven't had the time to sort them, and the correspondence with the cattle buyers has been backing up for 3 months because I'd rather pull fence wire in January than write letters." He paused. "It's a job. I pay fair wages. You'd have the back room, and Samuel would be here where it's warm. It's not charity," he added, and the way he said it told her he'd anticipated her objection and addressed it before she could raise it. "You'd be earning your place." Anna looked at him steadily. "Why?" He looked up from the pen. "Why what?" "Why offer this to a woman you found frozen in a line cabin 24 hours ago?" she said. "You don't know me. You don't know if I can actually do what I say I can do. You have no reason to trust me." "No," he said. "I don't." He put the pen down. "But I've got 3 months of accounts on that desk that I haven't touched, and 2 letters from a cattle buyer in Billings that I've read 6 times and still haven't answered, and Dot's been after me for a year to hire household help, and I've been putting it off because I didn't want to bring a stranger into the house." He paused. "You're already in the house," he said. "That part's done." It was the most practical thing anyone had ever said to her, and for reasons she couldn't entirely explain it, made her trust him more than any amount of warmth or reassurance would have. "All right," she said. "Show me the accounts." He showed her the accounts. They were, as he had promised, a disaster. 3 months of receipts stuffed into a wooden box with no apparent system. 2 columns in a ledger that hadn't been balanced since October, and a sheaf of cattle purchase agreements that needed copying and filing before the spring sales. Anna sat down at the desk, put Samuel in the padded crate Dot had produced from somewhere, and placed near the stove and started sorting. By noon, she had the receipts organized by date and supplier. By mid-afternoon, she had found 2 billing errors, one where Nathan had been overcharged by the farrier, and one where a supply order had been recorded twice that together amounted to nearly $14. She brought both to Nathan without ceremony. "You've been paying the farrier for the same shoe work twice," she said, setting the papers in front of him. "And this supply order from November was entered twice in the ledger. You're owed money." Nathan looked at the papers for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You found that in one afternoon." The system wasn't complicated, she said. It just wasn't a system. Something happened on his face, not quite a smile, but the cousin of one. I'll ride to Millhaven tomorrow and sort out the farrier, he said. Can you write up a summary of the discrepancy for me to bring? Already did, she said, and put the summary on top of the papers. He picked it up, read it, and nodded. All right, he said. You can do the accounts. I told you I could, Anna said, and went back to the desk. Dot appeared in the kitchen doorway, with an expression that suggested she had been watching this exchange from a careful distance and had formed opinions about it. She said nothing to Nathan, but when she brought Anna a fresh cup of coffee. An hour later, she set it down with a firmness that communicated approval more clearly than any compliment. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that Anna built herself deliberately, because rhythm was the thing that kept the fear at a manageable distance. She was up before Nathan. She helped Dot with the morning kitchen work not because it was required of her, but because the activity settled something restless in her. She sat with the accounts from mid-morning until Samuel needed attention, then again in the early afternoon, while Dot kept an eye on the baby with the matter-of-fact tenderness of a woman who had raised several children and knew that an infant's primary requirement was simply a warm, steady presence nearby. She wrote the letter to the Billings cattle buyer. She organized the filing system. She started a running household ledger that tracked expenditure by category, so that Nathan could see at a glance what the ranch was spending on supplies versus labor versus feed versus maintenance. On the fourth day, Nathan came in from the barn with a problem. I've got a contract dispute with a supplier in Helena, he said. He's saying I agreed to a price on hay that I never agreed to, and he's threatening to put it to the county trade board. He set a letter on the desk in front of her. I need to respond, and I need the response to be correct. Anna read the letter. Do you have your original correspondence with him? Somewhere. Find it, she said. It took them an hour together to locate the original agreement, which had been filed under the wrong year. Anna read it, read the dispute letter again, and wrote a response in 20 minutes that was precise, factual, and she chose the phrasing carefully, sufficiently firm to make clear that Nathan Cole was not a man who could be bullied by a mischaracterization of a signed document, but courteous enough that it left the supplier a door to walk back through without losing face. Nathan read the draft, then he read it again. Where did you learn to write like that? He asked. I worked for a man in Columbus who was in and out of contract disputes every other month, she said. He couldn't write a coherent letter to save himself. I learned because someone had to. Nathan looked at her for a moment, with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one where he was recalibrating, adding something new to whatever internal accounting he kept of the people around him. Then he said, send it, and went back out to the barn. It was during the second week that Dot told her about the wife. It came out the way things like that come out, sideways in the middle of something else. They were working in the kitchen together, Anna holding Samuel on her hip while she helped Dot with the bread, and Dot said without any particular setup. He lost them 7 years ago. Wife and the little girl. Fever came through the valley in the summer of '77. Took 6 people before it was done. Anna was quiet for a moment. He's never mentioned it. He wouldn't, Dot said. He's not the kind of man who mentions things like that. He just went quiet after. And then he went to work, and the work got bigger, and the quiet got bigger with it, and that's how he's been. She punched the bread dough with a brisk efficiency that suggested she'd made her peace with this a long time ago. He's a good man, she said. I want you to know that, because good men who've been through what he's been through sometimes look like cold men from the outside. He doesn't seem cold, Anna said. No, Dot said. But he's careful. Careful about what he lets in. She looked at Anna with the directness of an older woman who has given up on being subtle because life is too short for it. You've been good for this house, she said. I want you to know that too. Anna didn't know what to say to that, so she said, the bread needs another 10 minutes. I know how long the bread needs, Dot said, but she was smiling when she said it. The day. Thomas Granger came back. The sky was the same color it had been on the morning he left, gray and deliberate, building toward something. Anna was at the desk when she heard hoofbeats in the yard, and something in the particular rhythm of them. Not Nathan's measured approach. Not any of the ranch hand's familiar patterns made her go still before she even looked up. She looked up. Through the window, she could see Thomas Granger dismounting at the gate. He was wearing his good coat, the one he kept for town, and he had the look of a man who had prepared for something, arranged himself around a particular kind of performance. Behind him were two men she didn't recognize, and that was the thing that made her stomach drop all the way to the floor, because Thomas Granger alone was a problem she had already survived once. Thomas Granger with company was a different equation. She was on her feet before she'd made the decision to stand. She picked up. Samuel went to the kitchen and said to Dot, "Thomas Granger is in the yard." Dot turned from the stove. Her face went through several things in quick succession. "How many with him?" "2 men," Anna said. "I don't know them." "Stay here," Dot said, and moved toward the front of the house with the speed and intention of a woman who had handled trouble before and knew that getting there first mattered. But Nathan was already at the door. Anna didn't know where he'd come from, the barn maybe, or the side yard, but he was standing on the porch when Thomas reached the steps, and he was not making any move to come down and meet him on level ground. He stood at the top of the porch steps with his arms at his sides and his hat on and his expression completely neutral, and he said, "Thomas." "Nathan," Thomas said. He had his hat in his hands, which was the pose of a reasonable man, and his voice was the voice of a man who had rehearsed this. "I've come for my wife." "Your wife," Nathan said. "You want to be specific about who you mean." "Anna Whitaker," Thomas said. "She arrived at my ranch 2 weeks ago. We had an arrangement. She broke it and left without notice, and she took my horse." The word horse landed in the yard between them like something thrown. Anna had come to the doorway without intending to. She was standing just inside the front door, Samuel on her hip, and she heard Thomas say, "Your horse," and something ignited in her chest that had been banked for 2 weeks. Not anger exactly, more like a refusal, so absolute, it bypassed anger entirely and went somewhere colder and clearer. Nathan had not moved. "She took your horse," he said. "That's what I said." "Which horse would that be?" Thomas paused, just for a moment, just long enough for a person paying attention to notice. "The gray mare," he said. "The one I kept in the north barn." "The gray mare with the bad leg," Nathan said. "The one you left behind when you took your 2 good horses and left town." The silence in the yard after that sentence was extraordinary. One of the men Thomas had brought with him shifted his weight. The other looked at the ground. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I went to get supplies," Thomas said. "In the opposite direction from Millhaven," Nathan said. "In January, with both your saddle horses." "That's not—" Thomas stopped, recalibrated, returned to the script he'd prepared. "This isn't about the horse," he said. "Anna left a legal arrangement. We had a contract." "You had a letter," Nathan said, "written by you, promising a woman safe passage west and a home in Montana, promising to accept her son." He paused. "That letter in your hand, is it?" Thomas wasn't holding any letter. He hadn't brought one. He'd brought 2 men whose function was apparently decorative. "I don't need to—" "Because she has copies," Nathan said. "Both the letters where you mention the boy by name, both the ones where you use the word welcome." He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. "So when you say she broke an arrangement, I'd be careful about which arrangement you're referring to." Thomas looked past Nathan at the doorway. He found Anna standing there, and whatever he'd expected to see on her face. Fear, maybe, or the particular kind of exhausted compliance he'd tried to produce in her for a week wasn't there. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the empty barn on the morning she understood what he'd done, clear-eyed, already past it. "You've no right to keep her here," Thomas said. "I'm not keeping her anywhere," Nathan said. "She's employed here. She runs my household accounts and manages my correspondence. She's paid a fair wage and she's free to leave whenever she chooses." He paused. "Are you choosing to leave Mrs. Whitaker?" Anna walked to the doorway. She put one hand on the doorframe. Samuel settled on her hip, and she looked at Thomas Granger. Really looked at him, the way she should have looked at him before she ever boarded a train west, and she said, "No, I'm not." Thomas's face went through something complicated and settled on a version of outrage. "That baby is my son," he said. "I have a right." "Samuel is my son," Anna said. You knew he existed before I arrived. You made promises about him in writing. Then you left us in a storm with no food, and no means of transport, and no warning." She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without performance, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. "You have no right to anything. The law might disagree," Thomas said, and his voice had shifted. Lost the reasonable husband pose, and found something underneath it that was meaner and more specific. A mail order arrangement is a legal contract, and a man has rights to any child born under his. "Samuel was born before I ever wrote you a single letter," Anna said. "He has no legal connection to you. His father's name is not yours, and it was never going to be yours because you made it very clear from the second day that you wanted a housekeeper, not a family." She adjusted Samuel on her hip. "And if you'd like to pursue this before a judge, I'd welcome that conversation. I have letters. You have a story." The yard was very quiet. The two men Thomas had brought were not meeting anyone's eyes. Nathan was still standing at the top of the porch steps with his arms at his sides, and his stillness had the quality of something banked. Not passive, not indifferent, but the kind of quiet that belongs to a man who knows he doesn't need to move first. Thomas put his hat back on his head. "This isn't finished," he said. "I expect it's not," Nathan said. "But it's finished for today." Thomas left. He took his two men with him, and he rode east toward Millhaven, and Anna watched him go from the porch doorway until the horses were small against the white distance, and then she went inside and sat down at the desk and picked up the pen she'd put down 20 minutes earlier, as though nothing had happened. Dot appeared with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Anna without a word. Nathan came back inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "You all right?" "Yes," Anna said. "He'll go to the sheriff," Nathan said. "Or to the town council. He knows men there and he'll use them." "I know," Anna said. She put down the pen. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you say that to him?" she asked. "About the direction he rode and the horses. You didn't have to give him that much." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Because it's true," he said. "And because men like Thomas Granger spend a long time counting on people not saying the true thing out loud." He looked at her with the careful directness she'd come to recognize as just being how he spoke. It's harder to run a lie when someone just keeps saying what actually happened. Anna thought about that. "That's what I've been doing," she said. "Since I got here. Just saying what actually happened." "I know," Nathan said. "I've been watching." She looked at him. He looked at her. In the corner near the stove, Samuel made a small sound, not crying, just existing, announcing his presence in the warm room, and the moment passed into something ordinary, and they both returned to the work of the day. But something had shifted. Anna could feel it the same way she'd felt the storm coming that first morning, not by seeing it yet, but by the particular quality of the air before it arrived. Thomas was not going to let this go. She had known that from the moment she saw him in the yard, from the way he'd come prepared with witnesses, instead of words, from the way his voice had moved from rehearsed to real when she refused to be afraid of him. Thomas Granger was a man who had organized his whole life around other people accommodating him, and she had stopped accommodating him, and that was the kind of thing that made men like Thomas reach for whatever mechanism was available. What he reached for was the law. 3 days after his visit to the ranch, a letter arrived from Millhaven. It was addressed to Nathan, and it was from a man named Prescott Hale, who was an attorney. The same attorney. Nathan told her without particular surprise, who handled most of Thomas Granger's legal and financial affairs. The letter was formal and precisely worded, and it contained a claim that Anna Whitaker had entered into a binding marital arrangement with Thomas Granger that had been dissolved without proper cause, and that Nathan Cole was harboring a woman in breach of that arrangement, and furthermore, that the child in question, Samuel Whitaker, was subject to paternal claims that Thomas Granger intended to pursue through the county court. Paternal claims. Anna read those 2 words 4 times. She read them with the particular focus of someone who has been very afraid and has chosen through long practice to convert that fear into something she can actually use. "He's claiming Samuel," she said. "He's threatening to," Nathan said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" she said. "In front of a judge who knows Thomas Granger and doesn't know me." Nathan sat down across from her. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was thinking something through to its end, before he said it. "Thomas has money, and he has connections," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. The sheriff in Millhaven has been to dinner at his house twice that I know of." He paused. "But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" Anna said. "He put things in writing," Nathan said. "The letters you have. He invited you here in writing. He named Samuel in writing. He used the word welcome." He looked at her steadily. "And you walked 2 miles in a blizzard, and you survived, and you came here, and you've been working, and you've been seen by Dot, by Holt, by Rivers, by every hand on this property doing exactly what you said you came here to do, which is earn your place." He paused. "A judge can be bought, but a judge can also be embarrassed. And a claim of abandonment that a man can't explain his way around is embarrassing." Anna folded the letter, unfolded it, folded it again. "What if it's not enough?" "Then we find more," Nathan said. "But I'd start with what we have, which is the truth. And the truth laid out clearly in front of people who haven't decided what they believe. Yet that's not nothing." Anna put the letter down. She picked up her pen. She opened the household ledger to a clean page, and she wrote across the top of it in her clear, careful hand the date and the words, "What I know to be true." And then she started writing. She wrote everything. The letters from Thomas, word for word from memory with the dates. The arrival at the ranch. The list. Thomas handed her that first morning. The conversations, all of them, as precisely as she could render them. The morning she found the barn empty. The walk through the snow. The cabin. Nathan and his riders at the door. She wrote it not as a complaint, and not as a plea, but as a document the way she'd learned to write documents in Columbus, where precision was the whole point, and emotion was only useful if it clarified something factual. When she was done, she had 7 pages. She handed them to Nathan. He read them standing at the kitchen counter, turning the pages slowly, not speaking. When he reached the last page, he stood still for a moment, and then he looked up. "This is very good," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "I don't know if that's enough." "It's a start," Nathan said. He put the pages down carefully. "I know a lawyer in Billings, not Prescott Hale's kind of lawyer, the kind who reads documents instead of calling in favors. I'll write to him tomorrow." "I'll write to him," Anna said. Nathan looked at her. "You said I manage your correspondence," she said. "This is correspondence." Something moved across his face, not quite the smile, still the cousin of it, but closer this time. "Fair enough," he said. "Write to him." She wrote to him that evening after Samuel was asleep and Dot had gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the sound of Nathan's pen at the far end of the table, where he was working through the hay supplier dispute. She wrote the letter to the Billings lawyer the same way she'd written Nathan's contract response, precise, factual, and sufficiently clear that the reader would understand immediately what was at stake, without needing to be told how to feel about it. She sealed it and put it on the stack for the Morning Post. And then she sat for a moment at the table with the pen still in her hand, and the lamp burning low, and Samuel asleep in the back room, and the enormous quiet of the Montana night around the house. "It's going to get harder before it gets easier," she said. She wasn't asking, and she wasn't complaining. She was just naming the shape of what was ahead, the way you name weather. Nathan set down his pen. He looked at her across the table. "Probably," he said. "He's going to say things in town," she said. "About me. About Samuel. About you probably for keeping me here." "Probably," Nathan said again. "Does that concern you?" she asked. And she meant it as a genuine question, not a test she was asking, because she needed to know the actual answer, because the actual answer mattered. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been in this valley for 15 years. I've been a good neighbor where I could be, and a fair employer, and an honest trader, and the people who know me know those things." He paused. "Thomas Granger has money and habits. That combination has a particular kind of reputation too." Another pause. "I'm not worried about what people say. I'm concerned about what happens in front of a judge. Those are different things." "Yes," Anna said. "They are." She put the pen down. She looked at the sealed letter on the stack. Outside the window, the Montana sky was enormous and absolutely clear, the stars so thick they looked structural, like they were holding something up. She had $11 and 2 letters and 7 pages of careful truth, and 1 sleeping son, and a job she had earned, and a room that was warm and somewhere in Millhaven. Thomas Granger was building a case out of lies and influence, and the particular confidence of a man who had never had anyone call him on either. She was going to call him on both. She had already started. The letter from Billings came back in 8 days. Anna knew it had arrived before Nathan said a word about it, because she heard him come in from the Morning Post run, with a different kind of quiet. Not his usual settled silence, but something heavier. Something he was carrying carefully. She was at the desk when he came through the kitchen door, and she put down her pen and turned around, and he set the letter in front of her without preamble. "Read it," he said. She read it. The lawyer's name was Edmund Carr, and he wrote the way men write when they've spent 30 years in courtrooms and have no patience left for softening things unnecessarily. He had reviewed the situation as Anna had described it. He believed the letters Anna possessed were significant. He also believed, and he said this plainly, that Thomas Granger's claim regarding Samuel, while legally thin, was not legally impossible in Montana Territory in 1884, because the laws governing children born outside of marriage were inconsistent and largely dependent on the sympathies of the presiding judge. He said that the Millhaven County Court was presided over by a Judge Aldous Crane, who had been on the bench for 11 years, and whose record suggested a preference for maintaining existing social arrangements over disrupting them. He said, "Come to Billings." Anna put the letter down. "He thinks we might lose," she said. "He thinks it's not certain," Nathan said. "That's different." "Is it?" She picked the letter back up and read the relevant section again. A preference for maintaining existing social arrangements. "He's saying the judge will side with Thomas because Thomas is the kind of man judges side with." "He's saying it's a risk," Nathan said. "He's not saying it's guaranteed." He sat down across from her. "But I agree that Millhaven is the wrong venue. If we can get this moved to—" "We can't move it," Anna said. "Thomas filed in Millhaven. His lawyer filed in Millhaven. It's Aldous Crane's courtroom, and Thomas knows every person who's ever eaten supper in that building." She set the letter flat on the desk. "We fight it here, or we don't fight it." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Then we fight it here." "With what?" she said. "We have letters, sirs. We have my account of what happened. We have you and Dot and the ranch hands as witnesses that I've been working and that Samuel is safe." She paused. "Thomas has Prescott Hale and Judge Crane's dinner invitations." "Thomas also has enemies," Nathan said. She looked at him. "He's been in this valley for 9 years," Nathan said. "He's borrowed money he didn't pay back. He's broken contracts. He's underpaid men for work they completed, and then told them it wasn't done right when they asked for what they were owed." He leaned forward slightly. "A man like that doesn't just have a reputation. He has a history, and history has witnesses." Anna was quiet. She thought about Thomas handing her that list on the first morning, the way he'd looked at Samuel, the way he'd left not in a rush, not in a panic, but methodically with planning, taking the supplies he wanted and leaving what he didn't, and riding in the wrong direction from a man who had somewhere specific to go. "You think people will speak up?" she said. "I think people have been waiting for a reason to," Nathan said. She picked up her pen. "Then let's give them one." The next 10 days were unlike anything Anna had managed before, and she had managed quite a lot. She wrote letters not just to Edmund Carr in Billings, but to every person Nathan knew who had direct experience of Thomas Granger's particular brand of commerce. Nathan rode to 3 neighboring properties himself, and came back each evening with the names of men willing to speak. Men who would put their accounts in writing. Men who had been waiting as he'd predicted for someone to ask the right question. What surprised her was how quickly the town shifted. Not all of it. Not the part that ran on Thomas's credit, or ate at his table, or owed him a favor they hadn't repaid. But the other part, the part she hadn't known existed, because she'd arrived as a stranger, with no knowledge of the social landscape. That part began to move in ways she could feel before she could see them. It started with a woman named Clara Pemberton, who ran the seamstress shop on Millhaven's Main Street and who had 2 years prior sewn a complete set of table linens for Thomas Granger's dining room, on the understanding that payment would follow delivery. Payment had not followed delivery. Clara had written twice and received no response. She had absorbed the loss because pursuing it would have cost more in social capital than the linens were worth, and she was a woman alone in a small town in Montana, and those calculations were ones she understood intimately. Clara Pemberton sent a note to the coal ranch the Wednesday of the second week. It was addressed to Anna Whitaker, and it said simply, "I heard what he did. I'd like to speak with you." Anna sent back a note the same afternoon. She rode into Millhaven with Holt the following morning, which was the first time she'd been in town, and she sat across from Clara Pemberton in the back room of the seamstress shop and listened to 2 years of carefully contained anger lay itself out in precise, usable detail. "He told me the linens weren't the right color," Clara said. "After I'd delivered them, after I'd done the work. He said the color wasn't what he specified, and he wouldn't pay until I remade them." She looked at her hands on the table. "The color was exactly what he specified. I had the original note he sent me. I showed it to him. He said I'd misread it." "Did you keep the note?" Anna asked. Clara looked up. "I keep everything," she said. She had the note. She had the delivery receipt Thomas had signed. She had the 2 letters she'd sent to him afterward, which she'd kept copies of, and the silence that had answered them. Anna said, "Would you be willing to bring these to a county hearing?" Clara Pemberton looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been waiting for exactly this question for approximately 2 years. "Yes," she said, "I would." That was the first one. The second was a ranch hand named Bill Dawson, who had worked for Thomas for 4 months in the summer of 1882 and had been shorted on 6 weeks of wages when Thomas declared the work incomplete. Bill Dawson had a signed work agreement and a memory for numbers that was essentially photographic and a quiet, steady manner that Anna recognized as the type that juries found credible. The third was a feed supplier from the eastern end of the valley who had delivered 3 seasons of hay on Thomas's credit and found at the end of the 3rd season that the credit had been extended without his knowledge or consent, and that the total outstanding was more than he could absorb without selling equipment. By the end of the 2nd week, Anna had a folder of documented accounts. 6 people. 6 separate incidents. Different years, different circumstances. The same pattern. Thomas Granger promising something, receiving the benefit of that promise, and then restructuring the terms when payment came due. She put the folder on the desk in front of Nathan and said, "It's a pattern." He looked through the documents. He turned pages slowly, reading carefully, and when he reached the end, he sat back and said, "How did you get all of this in 10 days?" "I asked," Anna said, "and I listened, and I wrote everything down the moment I heard it before it could get blurred." She paused. "People have been holding these things for years. They just needed somewhere to put them." Nathan looked at the folder and then at her. "This changes the case," he said. "It changes the story," Anna said. "The case is still Aldous Crane's courtroom." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." The quality of his voice when he said it made her set down her pen. "Thomas has been to see the judge," Nathan said. "Not officially, not through his lawyer. He went to Crane's house 2 nights ago." He paused. "I have this from a man I trust. Thomas told Crane that you're unstable, that you came to Montana in a disordered state and imposed yourself on my household, and that he's trying to recover his son from an unsuitable environment." The words went into her like something cold and specific. Unstable, imposed, unsuitable. She sat with them for a moment. She was aware of Nathan watching her, and of Samuel asleep in the back room, and of the folder of careful documentation on the desk in front of her, and she waited until the cold feeling had passed her in its place. "He's trying to move the question," she said, "from what he did to what I am." "Yes," Nathan said. "Then we move it back," she said. "Every time he moves it, we move it back." She picked up her pen. "What's the hearing date?" 3 weeks, Nathan said. "Good," she said. 3 weeks is enough." It was during that 3rd week that the thing happened she hadn't prepared for. She was in town again, returning a set of documents to Clara Pemberton's shop when she encountered Rebecca Hale on the main street. Rebecca was the wife of Prescott Hale Thomas's attorney, and she was precisely the kind of woman that a small town in 1884 organized itself around, the kind whose approval or disapproval functioned as a social weather system. She was well-dressed, well-spoken, and standing in front of the dry goods store with two other women when Anna came around the corner with Holt a few steps behind. Anna had no illusions about what this encounter would be. She knew whose wife Rebecca Hale was. She knew what Thomas had been saying in town. She kept her chin level and her pace steady, and she was going to walk past without incident when Rebecca Hale said clearly and deliberately to the woman beside her, "That's her, the one from Ohio." Anna stopped. She turned. She looked at Rebecca Hale with the same clear, direct attention she'd been giving everything since the morning she found the empty barn. The attention of someone who has decided that reality, however difficult, is the only useful starting place. "Mrs. Hale," she said. Rebecca Hale had the grace to look slightly startled that she'd been addressed. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said after a moment. "I imagine your husband has told you about my situation," Anna said. She kept her voice even and conversational the way. Nathan kept his voice like the facts themselves were sufficient and didn't require decoration. "I imagine he's presented it from Thomas Granger's perspective." "He's presented the legal facts," Rebecca Hale said. "I'm sure he has," Anna said. "I'd like to offer you a different set of facts if you have a moment." Rebecca Hale's expression was the expression of a woman who had not expected this, had expected probably embarrassment or deflection, or the particular withdrawal of a woman who knows she's outmatched socially and behaves accordingly. The two women beside her were very still. "Your husband's client," Anna said, "left a woman and a 6-month-old baby in a line cabin in a January snowstorm with no food, no transport, and no warning. He cleared out his pantry before he left. He took both his good horses and left the lame one." She paused. "He did this after writing 2 letters in which he specifically named my son and used the word welcome." She paused again. "I have both letters. I have a summary of the documented accounts of 6 other people in this valley whom your husband's client treated in a similar fashion over the past 9 years. She paused one final time. "I am not unstable, Mrs. Hale. I'm a mother who walked 2 miles in a blizzard to keep her son alive. There is a difference." The street was very quiet. Rebecca Hale looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening on her face that Anna couldn't fully read, not hostility exactly, not sympathy exactly, but something in between that looked like reconsideration. "Good day, Mrs. Whitaker," she said. "Good day," Anna said. She walked on. Behind her she could hear the 3 women begin to murmur, and she didn't look back because looking back was the kind of thing you did when you weren't sure you'd said the right thing, and she was sure. Holt caught up with her half a block later. "That was something," he said. "It was the truth," Anna said. "It tends to be something." She found out 3 days later what it had been specifically. Rebecca Hale had gone home and asked her husband about the letters. Prescott Hale had told her they were irrelevant to the legal question of marital arrangement. Rebecca Hale had then on her own initiative spoken to a woman named Martha Gould, whose husband had been one of Thomas Granger's outstanding creditors, and who had never forgiven Thomas for what the debt had cost their family. Martha Gould had spoken to 2 others. By the end of the week, there was a conversation happening in Millhaven that Thomas Granger had not initiated and could not control, and it was being conducted largely by women, which meant it was happening in every kitchen and dry goods counter and seamstress shop and church social in the county, without any of the formal mechanisms Thomas could use to shut it down. Nathan heard about it from one of his ranch hands who had been in town for supplies. He told Anna at supper, and Anna listened, and when he finished, she said, "Good." "You started it," Nathan said. "Clara Pemberton started it," Anna said. "I just gave her somewhere to put what she already knew." Nathan looked at her. He did that with increasing frequency. Looked at her in the particular way he had of looking at things he was still in the process of understanding. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was, if anything, the most honest form of attention she'd received from another person in a long time, because it didn't have a predetermined destination. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "Why haven't you asked me what happened with Samuel's father?" The question surprised him. She could see it, a brief shift in his stillness, a recalibration. How was quiet for a moment. "Because it's not my business," he said. "You're putting your name and your property and your reputation between me and a man who's threatening a county court action," she said. "Most people would say it's relevant. Most people would be looking for a reason not to help," he said. "I already decided to help. What happened before you got here doesn't change that." She looked at him for a long time. "He was a merchant's son in Columbus," she said. "We were engaged. He left when I told him I was expecting. His family paid mine a sum of money to make the situation uncomplicated." She said it flatly, without apology or performance, the way she said everything. "I kept Samuel, and I gave back the money, and I went to work. That's the whole of it." Nathan nodded once. He didn't say he was sorry, which she appreciated, because she wasn't sorry not for Samuel, not for any of it, and being told you should be sorry for a child by someone who meant well was still being told the wrong thing. "Does that change anything for you?" she asked. "No," he said. "Good," she said. They went back to their respective work, and the evening settled around them, the way evenings at the Cole Ranch settled, with a particular quality of quiet that Anna had come to recognize as not emptiness, but density. The kind of quiet that has substance in it, that is made of something, rather than the absence of something. She was 3 days from the hearing when Thomas came back. Not to the ranch this time. He was smarter than that. He'd learned from the first visit that showing up at Nathan Cole's porch with 2 decorative witnesses was not the move it had seemed in his preparation. This time, he sent a message. It arrived with the Morning Post addressed to Anna, and it was not through Prescott Hale. It was in Thomas's own handwriting. She recognized it from his letters. The same slightly forward slant, the same pressure on the downstrokes that suggested a man who held his pen like he was trying to keep it from getting away. The letter said, "I will drop the hearing if you come back. You and the boy. No conditions. I was hasty. I made mistakes. Come back, and we will start again." Anna read it once. She folded it. She put it in the folder with the other documents, the 6 accounts, the 2 original letters, the summary for Edmund Carr, and she labeled the folder tab with the date and added Thomas Granger Personal Correspondence and put it in the desk drawer. She told Nathan about it at supper. He read it. He read it again. He set it on the table between them. "He's frightened," he said. "He's losing the social argument," Anna said. "Rebecca Hale's conversations have been happening for a week. He can feel it." She paused. "He thinks if he gets me back to the ranch, the hearing goes away, and the conversation goes away with it." "And Samuel," Nathan said. "Samuel goes with me," Anna said, "which means Samuel is on his property and subject to whatever he decides to do next." She looked at the letter. "Which is the whole point." "You're not going," Nathan said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It had the texture of something he needed to say out loud to make certain it was true. "I'm not going," Anna said. "What do you need for the hearing?" he said. "I need Bill Dawson there in person," she said. "And Clara Pemberton. And the feed supplier, what's his name? Arthur Meade. Arthur Meade. And I need Edmund Carr to be at least willing to advise by letter if he won't come in person." She paused. "And I need you." Nathan looked at her. "You have me," he said. She nodded. She had known that. She had known it from the morning he stood at the top of the porch steps and told Thomas Granger about the direction he'd ridden with his horses. But there was a difference between knowing something and hearing it confirmed, and the confirmation mattered. "There's one more thing," Nathan said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet before he said something he'd been thinking about for a while. "Thomas is going to argue in that courtroom that you're living in an improper arrangement, that a single woman in my household is inappropriate, and that this reflects on your character, and by extension on your fitness as a mother." Anna had been waiting for this. She'd known it was coming since the second week when she'd thought through the full shape of Thomas's available arguments. "I know," she said. "Prescott Hale is going to stand up in front of Aldous Crane and make that argument," Nathan said. And Crane may agree with it. Not because it's true, but because it fits the framework he uses for these things. I know, Anna said again. What are you saying? Nathan looked at her directly, with the particular directness that meant he was going to say the actual thing, and not the comfortable version of it. I'm saying that if you were my wife, he said, that argument disappears. The room was very quiet. Anna set down her fork. She looked at him. He looked at her steady, clear, not performing anything. He had the manner of a man who had made a large decision and was presenting it without ornamentation, because he trusted her to evaluate it honestly. That's a practical argument, she said finally. It's also a true one, he said. I'm not saying it because of the hearing. I'm saying it because it's been true for longer than I've said it. He paused. But I don't want you to answer it because of the hearing. I want you to answer it because of what it actually is. She thought about what it actually was. She thought about the accounts ledger and the contract letter and the morning she'd found the billing errors and brought them to him without ceremony. She thought about the way he'd stepped aside to let her off the porch first because it was built into him. She thought about what Dot had said. A good man who has been through things can look like a cold man from the outside. He did not look cold to her. He had not looked cold to her for a very long time. I need to think, she said. I know, he said. Take your time. She took 2 days. She thought about Ohio and the merchant's son and the money his family had offered and the way she'd handed it back. She thought about the train west and the letters she'd read 3 times each and the word honored and the word welcome. She thought about Thomas handing her the list on the first morning and the tool crate lined with her coat and the empty barn. She thought about Samuel asleep in the warm back room of a house that had in 7 weeks become more home to her than anywhere she'd lived in 5 years. She thought about Nathan sitting across from her at the table every evening, not crowding her, not requiring anything from her, just present in the way that some people are present, which is to say, in a way that makes the room feel more real. On the second day, she went to the kitchen where Dot was working, and she said, I'm going to say yes. Dot did not stop working. She said, I know. You know, Anna said. I've been watching you think for 2 days, Dot said. The answer was always yes. You were just making sure you were saying it for the right reasons. She looked at Anna. Are you? Yes, Anna said. Then go tell him, Dot said. He's been in the barn since breakfast, which is what he does when he's waiting for something. Anna went to the barn. Nathan was checking a harness, not because it needed checking, but because his hands needed something to do, which was exactly what Dot had said, and which Anna filed away as one of the many things she was still learning about the specific language of this man. Yes, she said. He turned around. He looked at her for a moment, with the expression she'd come to know the recalibration, the addition of new information to whatever accounting he kept. Then something in his face shifted into something quieter and more certain, and he said, All right. Not because of the hearing, she said. I know, he said. And not because I have nowhere else to go, she said. I know that too, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. In the background, the ranch went about its business, the sounds of horses and wind and the distant work of the hands. And Anna thought about patterns, and about what it meant to choose something instead of accepting it, and about the difference between a door opening and walking through it on your own terms. We should tell Dot, she said. Dot already knows, Nathan said. Of course she does, Anna said. They went back inside, and Dot had coffee waiting, and Samuel was awake in his padded crate, making the sounds of a person who has opinions about the world and intends to express them. And Nathan picked him up with the ease of someone who had been doing it for weeks, which he had. And Samuel grabbed his collar with both hands and held on, which was what Samuel did, and the morning continued. The hearing was in 3 days. And Thomas Granger, sitting in Mill Haven, with his lawyer and his judge's dinner invitations, and his letter that had received no response, was about to discover that the woman he'd left in a line cabin had not in fact been waiting to be found. She had been building something, and it was almost finished. The morning of the hearing, Anna braided her hair twice. The first braid she did too tight, which she only noticed when she turned her head and felt the pull at her temple, and she took it apart and started again. And the second time she did it, the way she always did. Neat, practical, the kind that stayed in place through a long day's work. She had learned in the past 8 weeks that small things either anchor you or unmoor you, and she had made a policy of choosing the ones that anchor. Samuel was still sleeping when she came out to the kitchen. Dot was already at the stove, and she handed Anna a cup of coffee without turning around, which was as close to a pre-dawn embrace as Dot got, and Anna accepted it the same way she accepted everything Dot offered without ceremony, because ceremony wasn't the point. Nathan was in the kitchen, already sitting at the table in his good coat. He had his hat in his hands, and he was turning it by the brim, the same slow rotation around and around which she had learned was what Nathan did when he was thinking things through and preferred not to be asked about it. She sat down across from him and drank her coffee and didn't ask. After a moment, he said, "Edmund Carr's associate is already in Mill Haven. Arrived last night." She looked up. "Carr sent someone in person." "Young man named Foster," Nathan said. Apparently Carr decided the case was worth attending to properly after all. He paused. Or he heard about the hearing from enough different directions that he got curious. Anna set down her cup. "That's good," she said. "It is," Nathan said. "But Crane's still the judge." "I know," she said. They rode into Mill Haven in the wagon, Nathan and Anna and Holt, with Dot staying behind to watch Samuel. Anna had considered bringing Samuel and then decided against it, because she knew how a room full of men looked at a woman holding an infant during a legal proceeding, and she knew that what they saw was not a mother protecting her child, but a woman too disorganized to make proper arrangements, and she could not afford that interpretation today. Bill Dawson was waiting outside the courthouse when they arrived. So was Clara Pemberton, standing beside Arthur Meade with a folder of papers under her arm, and the expression of a woman who has been saving this moment for 2 years. Anna looked at the three of them and felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, but the specific weight of knowing that other people had put something at stake for her, and that what she did in the next several hours mattered for them too. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking," Clara said. "Some of us have been waiting for someone to ask." Bill Dawson tipped his hat. Arthur Meade said nothing, just gave a short nod that communicated he was there, and he was steady, and that was all that needed saying. Inside the courthouse, Prescott Hale was already at the plaintiff's table. He was a thin man with precise clothing and a way of arranging himself in a room that suggested long familiarity with having the advantage. Beside him, Thomas Granger sat with his hands flat on the table and the posture of a man who has been told to appear confident and is working at it. When Thomas saw Anna come through the door, something moved across his face. Not guilt. Anna had learned not to expect guilt from Thomas, because guilt required a person to have imagined the effect of their actions on someone else. And Thomas operated in a world where other people functioned as variables rather than subjects. What moved across his face was assessment. He was measuring the folder she carried, the presence of Nathan beside her, the fact that she had walked into the room without hesitating. Whatever calculation he ran, he didn't like the result. She could see that too. Judge Aldous Crane came in promptly. He was a large man, solid through the chest, with white hair and a manner that had been shaped by 11 years of being the most authoritative person in any room he entered. He settled into air with the deliberate weight of someone who understood that the pace of the proceedings was his to set, and he looked at both tables with the particular neutrality of a man who had not yet decided which side of neutral he would eventually land on. "This is a hearing in the matter of Thomas Granger against Anna Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Hale, you may begin." Prescott Hale stood up. He was very good at standing up. He had the timing of it, the way he let the room settle into his first breath before he spoke. Anna had expected this, and she watched it without reacting. "Your Honor," Hale said, "my client Thomas Granger entered into a documented marital arrangement with the respondent Anna Whitaker in the autumn of 1883. Mrs. Whitaker traveled to Montana Territory under that arrangement in January of 1884. Shortly after her arrival, she abandoned the arrangement without cause, removed herself and the infant child from my client's property, and subsequently took up residence in the household of Nathan Cole, a neighboring rancher, in circumstances that raised significant questions about her fitness and stability." He paused to let that land. Fitness, stability, the same words Thomas had used in his visit to Judge Crane's house. My client's primary concern, Hale continued, is the welfare of the child Samuel, who is currently living in an arrangement that my client believes to be inappropriate and potentially harmful. We ask the court to recognize Mr. Granger's legitimate interest in that child's welfare and to order a suitable resolution. He sat down. He had not said anything overtly untrue. He had arranged the true things in a particular order and used particular words around them, and the resulting structure had the shape of a reasonable argument. Anna felt Nathan shift slightly beside her. She put her hand flat on the table, not toward him, just flat. A steadying gesture she'd developed sometime in the past month, and she kept her eyes on Judge Crane. The young man named Foster stood for the respondent's table. He was perhaps 30, with a quiet intensity that Anna recognized as belonging to people who had learned early that being underestimated was an advantage if you knew how to use it. Your Honor, he said, the respondent will demonstrate that this hearing is based on a mischaracterization of events that is not supported by evidence and is in fact contradicted by documents in Mr. Granger's own handwriting. We will show that the child Samuel was not abandoned by Mrs. Whitaker, but was protected by her at significant personal risk from circumstances created by Mr. Granger's own actions. We will further show that Mr. Granger has demonstrated a pattern of making commitments he does not intend to honor, which is directly relevant to the question of whose account of these events is credible. Crane looked at him over the rims of his glasses. You have documentation of this pattern. We have sworn accounts from 6 individuals in this county, Your Honor, Foster said. And we have Mr. Granger's own letters. Thomas's jaw tightened. Prescott Hale's expression did not change, but something behind it did a very small recalibration, the kind you wouldn't catch unless you were looking for it. Anna was looking for it. Crane said, "Proceed." Hale called Thomas first. Thomas stood and told his version of events in the confident, measured voice of a man who had practiced this, who had. Anna guessed, said these words to himself in the mirror until they came out smooth. He described the marital arrangement. He described Anna's arrival. He described with careful regret his growing realization that the arrangement was not working, and his decision to go to town to think through his options. You left the ranch with both your primary horses, Foster said when his turn came for questions. And your saddle. I did, Thomas said. You also cleared the majority of the pantry supplies. I took what I needed for the journey. A journey to Millhaven, Foster said, which is east of your property. That's correct. Then why did your tracks go northwest, Foster said, toward the mountain pass? The courtroom was not large, and in its silence that question took up a great deal of space. Thomas looked at him. The tracks were I took a longer route. The eastern road was icy. The eastern road is the main road, Foster said. It's maintained. The northwest pass is not. He paused. Who did you visit in the northwest, Mr. Granger? Thomas's attorney was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The direction of my client's travel is not relevant to the question of. It speaks to intent, Foster said without raising his voice. If Mr. Granger left with supplies and both horses and traveled in the opposite direction from the town he claims was his destination, the question of whether he intended to return is directly relevant to whether Mrs. Whitaker had reason to believe she and her son had been abandoned. Crane looked at Thomas. Answer the question. Thomas said, I had business. With whom? A pause that lasted 2 full seconds. A man named Garrett. He runs cattle on the North Range. Did you inform Mrs. Whitaker that you would be visiting Mr. Garrett before going to town? I didn't think it necessary. Did you tell her when you would return? I told her I'd be back by nightfall. And were you? Foster said. Back by nightfall. Thomas said nothing. Prescott Hale said quietly, Your Honor. Were you back by nightfall? Foster repeated. No, Thomas said. When did you return to the ranch? Another pause. 3 days later. The room shifted. Anne heard it, not a sound exactly, but a quality change. The way a room sounds different when the people in it have just received information they're in the process of integrating. She kept her face still and her hands flat on the table. 3 days later, Foster said. And when you returned, was Mrs. Whitaker there? No, Thomas said, because she had walked 2 miles through a January blizzard with her infant son to find shelter. Foster said, Is that correct? I wasn't aware of. She was found in a line cabin on Nathan Cole's property, Foster said. She was found by Mr. Cole himself, who will testify to what he found when he opened that cabin door. At the time of her discovery, the temperature in the valley was approximately 12 degrees. She had been in the cabin for several hours. She had used her own coat to protect the infant. He paused. You described Mrs. Whitaker in your letter to Judge Crane as unstable. Thomas looked at his attorney. Hale's expression was controlled, but its edges were fraying. I described her as I expressed concern about her stability, yes. A woman who walked 2 miles in 12-degree weather to protect her child, Foster said. You find that unstable. I find the situation. Thank you, Mr. Granger, Foster said, and sat down. It was not the decisive moment. Anna knew better than to believe in decisive moments. Courtrooms didn't work that way, and judges who had been to a man's house for dinner didn't reverse course on the strength of one well-timed question. What it was the first real crack in Thomas's version of events. The first place where the shape of what he'd claimed didn't match the shape of what had actually happened, and where the gap between them was visible to everyone in the room. Crane called a recess. In the hallway, Nathan came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything, which was the right thing. She was running through the next portion of the proceedings in her head, the witness accounts, the letters, and she needed the quiet to do it. After a moment, she said, He went to Garrett's. Who's Garrett? Nathan said. Exactly, she said. That's the first time I've heard that name. He had somewhere to go. He planned this. She looked at Nathan. He didn't leave impulsively because the situation wasn't working. He made arrangements. He left on purpose. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Does that change anything legally? It changes the word abandonment from a description to an intention, she said. There's a difference between a man who left in frustration and came back 3 days later and a man who made arrangements elsewhere before he left. She paused. I need to find out who Garrett is, today if possible. Nathan said, Holt, who had been leaning against the wall 2 feet away, with the quiet competence of a man who is always slightly closer to the relevant situation than anyone expects, straightened up. I know a Garrett on the North Range, he said. Robert Garrett, runs cattle. He and Thomas have done business. Find out what kind, Anna said. Holt left. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When they returned, Foster called Clara Pemberton. Clara took the stand with her folder and her 2-year-old grievance, and she delivered it the way she'd delivered it to Anna in the back room of her shop, precisely factually, without ornamentation. The note Thomas had sent, specifying the linen color. The delivery receipt he had signed. The letters she'd sent afterward. The silence. The loss. Prescott Hale's cross-examination was not unkind, but it was thorough, and it was built on the implication that a private commercial dispute was irrelevant to the question of a marital arrangement and child welfare. Clara looked at him calmly when he finished and said, I'm not here to prove he owes me money. I'm here to demonstrate that Thomas Granger makes promises in writing and then denies making them when they become inconvenient. That seems relevant to me. She folded her hands in her lap. I imagine the judge can decide if it's relevant to him. Crane said nothing, but he wrote something on the paper in front of him. Arthur Meade was next with 3 seasons of hay invoices and a manner so steady and plain that even Prescott Hale seemed to lose interest in challenging him. Bill Dawson followed with his signed work agreement and his precise memory and the 6-week wage discrepancy that he'd been carrying for 3 years without interest. By the time Foster stood to introduce the letters, Thomas's letters, both of them with the specific mentions of Samuel and the word welcome, the room had a different quality than it had started with. The witnesses had done what witnesses do when they are honest and have been waiting a long time to be honest. They had made the pattern visible. Not one incident, not one person's word against another's, but the recurring shape of the same behavior across years and faces and amounts of money. Crane read both letters. He read them carefully the way he'd read everything, and when he looked up at Thomas's table, his expression had not changed, but something behind it had shifted. "Mr. Granger," he said, "you wrote these letters." "I did," Thomas said. "In the first letter you write, and I quote, 'The boy will be welcomed here as any child deserves to be welcomed with warmth and purpose.' Is that your handwriting?" "Yes." "And in the second you write, 'I have thought further on the matter of young Samuel, and I want you to know my position is unchanged. A boy needs a father, and I intend to be one worth having.' Did you write that?" A pause. "I did." "And then you handed Mrs. Whitaker a list of household duties on her first full day," Crane said, "and within the week told her the boy was, in your words, a burden." Thomas said, "I was the reality of the situation was different from." "Mr. Granger," Crane said, "I am going to ask you to be very careful with your next answer. Did you leave the ranch on the morning of January 14th with both primary horses, the majority of your food stores and your saddle, without informing Mrs. Whitaker of your destination or your expected return?" Thomas looked at Prescott Hale. Hale gave him nothing. "Yes," Thomas said. "And you did not return for 3 days." "That is correct. And during those 3 days," Crane said, "Mrs. Whitaker and her infant son were alone at your property with one lame horse, reduced food supplies, and an approaching winter storm." "I was not aware of the storms." "The storm was forecast," Crane said flatly. "It was the severest storm of the January season. It was discussed in the Millhaven Gazette 4 days before it hit." He looked down at his paper. He wrote something. He was quiet for a long moment. It was during that silence that the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Anna turned her head. Holt came in not hurriedly, but with the specific quality of someone carrying something important, and he came straight to the respondent's table and bent down and said quietly, but not so quietly that Nathan didn't hear it, "Garrett sold Thomas a quarter share in a cattle operation on the North Range. The sale was finalized January 12th, 2 days before Thomas left the ranch. January 12th. He had finalized a business deal on the 12th. He had left on the 14th. Anna turned to Foster and said under her breath, "Can we introduce new information?" Foster looked at her. He processed what she'd said in approximately 3 seconds. He stood up. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. We have just received information we believe is directly material to the question of intent. We request permission to present it." Crane looked at him. "What information?" "On January 12th of this year," Foster said. 2 days before Mr. Granger left the ranch, he finalized the purchase of a quarter share in a cattle operation on the North Range owned by a man named Robert Garrett. We have a witness prepared to confirm this and the financial terms of the transaction." Prescott Hale was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down, Mr. Hale," Crane said. He looked at Thomas. "Is this true?" Thomas's performance of calm was completely gone. What was underneath it was not outrage, which was what Anna had expected, but something closer to fear. The fear of a man who had built a version of events and is now watching it disassemble in front of people he cannot buy or quiet. "I made a business investment," he said. "That has nothing to do with—" "You made a business investment 2 days before you left your ranch," Crane said. "An investment that placed you on the North Range, which is in the opposite direction from Millhaven, for an indefinite period." He paused. "You had in effect already arranged an alternative occupation before you left. Which means when you told Mrs. Whitaker you were going to town for supplies, you knew that was not entirely accurate." The room was very still. Thomas said, "I intended to sort out the marriage arrangement when—" "Mr. Granger," Crane said, "when a man finalizes a business deal in one direction and then tells his household he's going in another direction and then does not return for 3 days, during which time his household, a woman and an infant, is left without adequate resources in a severe winter storm. The law does not require me to speculate about his intentions. His actions have communicated them." He set down his pen. "They have communicated them clearly." Anna felt Nathan's hand very briefly against her arm. Not gripping, not performing, just present. She sat up straight in her chair and looked at Judge Aldous Crane and waited. Crane said, "We will recess until 2 o'clock. In the recess." Thomas tried once more. He came across the room while Prescott Hale watched with the expression of a man who knows a client is about to make things worse, but has run out of ways to stop him. Thomas stopped at the edge of the respondent's table, and he looked at Anna, not at Nathan, not at Foster, at Anna, and he said quietly enough that it was almost private. "You've made your point. Let it go. Walk away, and I'll drop the custody question. I'll sign whatever you need." Anna looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Thomas shifted his weight, and she said, "You left my son in 12-degree weather." Thomas said nothing. "You had 2 letters in your own handwriting where you promised to be a father worth having," she said. "And then you handed me a list and put my son in a tool crate and left us in a storm." She paused. "I don't want you to drop the custody question, Thomas. I want the judge to drop it, because then it's done. If you drop it, you can pick it back up again whenever it suits you." She paused. "I'm not interested in whatever suits you." Thomas left the table. At 2 o'clock, Crane returned. He settled into his chair, arranged his papers, and looked at both tables with the expression of a man who has reached a conclusion through the available evidence and intends to deliver it without theater. In the matter of Thomas Granger's claim regarding the marital arrangement, he said, "I find that the arrangement was not abandoned by Mrs. Whitaker without cause. The documented evidence establishes that Mr. Granger made specific written commitments regarding both Mrs. Whitaker and the child Samuel, that he failed to honor those commitments beginning within days of Mrs. Whitaker's arrival, and that his departure on January 14th, in light of the business transaction finalized 2 days prior, suggests a planned rather than impulsive absence. Mrs. Whitaker's departure from the property under those circumstances does not constitute abandonment of the arrangement. It constitutes a reasonable response to having been abandoned herself." Prescott Hale wrote something on his pad. Thomas stared at the table. "Regarding the claim of paternal interest in the child, Samuel," Crane said, "Mr. Granger's letters acknowledge the child's existence prior to the marital arrangement and express explicit intent to accept the child as a member of the household. His subsequent behavior, the characterization of the child as a burden, the conditions under which he left the ranch, the failure to make any provision for the child's welfare during his 3-day absence establishes that he did not act in the capacity he claimed in those letters." Crane paused. He looked directly at Thomas. "A man cannot write that he intends to be a father worth having, and then use a child's welfare as a legal instrument when it suits him. The court finds no legitimate paternal claim established by Mr. Granger, and no basis for removing Samuel from his current arrangement." He closed the folder in front of him. "Costs to the plaintiff. This hearing is concluded." The room took a breath. Anna sat completely still for a moment. She was aware of Foster saying something beside her, and Nathan standing up, and Clara Pemberton across the room, putting her folder under her arm, with the brisk satisfaction of a woman whose accounts have been settled. She was aware of Thomas getting up from his table without looking at anyone, and Prescott Hale stacking his papers with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to accepting outcomes professionally. She was aware of all of it, and she was also somewhere else for a moment, back in the line cabin in the corner against the wall with Samuel pressed to her chest, and her breath coming out in small clouds, and the temperature dropping, and the certainty, which had not been hope or faith, but just clarity, that she was going to get him through this. She had gotten him through this. Nathan put his hand on her shoulder just for a moment, just the weight of it, and she reached up and put her hand over his, and then they were both standing up, and the room was moving around them, and the day was continuing. The way days do, with the same unremarkable momentum as always. As though the most important moments don't know. They're the most important moments and simply proceed. Outside, the sky had cleared. Clara Pemberton appeared at Anna's elbow and said, "Coffee. There's a place on the main street that makes it properly." She looked at Anna. "You look like you need coffee and someone to talk to who isn't a lawyer." "I do," Anna said. "Then come on," Clara said. Bill Dawson and Arthur Meade were waiting on the steps. Bill tipped his hat. Arthur gave his short nod. Anna looked at them, these people who had come on her word and stood in a courtroom for her, and whose names she would know for the rest of her life, and she said, "I don't know how to thank you." Arthur said, "You already did. You asked." They went to the place on the main street that made coffee properly, And Dot's word for what was in Anna's face when she came through the door that evening was not triumphant, because Dot had seen enough of life to know that triumph is a complicated thing, and quiet satisfaction is more durable. What she said was, "Samuel ate his whole supper and then tried to eat the spoon." And then she put supper on the table, and they sat down all of them in the kitchen of the coal ranch, with the stove putting out heat, and the night settled around the house, and Nathan poured coffee and handed Anna the first cup, and looked at her across the table with an expression that didn't need any words around it. She had walked into this valley with $11 and 2 letters and 1 sleeping child, and nothing else she could count on, and she had turned all of it, every careful letter, every documented account, every honest word said in a room where honesty was supposed to be a disadvantage, into something that a judge in a county courthouse had been unable to argue with. Not because someone had saved her, because she had refused from the very first morning to accept a version of events that wasn't true. Samuel banged his spoon on the edge of the crate and laughed at the sound it made, and the kitchen filled up with that particular warmth that isn't temperature, but something that lives inside it, and Anna looked at her son and thought, "We are all right." For the first time since Ohio, they were all right. 3 days after the hearing, a letter arrived from Thomas Granger. Anna saw it in the morning stack before Nathan did, recognized the handwriting immediately, and felt not fear, not anger, but a specific tiredness, the kind that belongs to a person who has finished a hard thing and would very much like the hard thing to know it is finished. She picked it up, opened it, and read it standing at the desk. It was not another threat. It was not another offer. It was 6 sentences in Thomas's careful, forward-slanted hand. And what it said, stripped of the formal language around it, was this: he was leaving Montana Territory. He had completed his transaction with Garrett on the North Range and had no remaining business in the valley. He wished to make clear that he would make no further legal claims regarding Samuel. He wished Anna well. He did not apologize. She had not expected him to. She folded the letter, put it in the folder labeled Thomas Granger, Personal Correspondence, and put the folder in the back of the bottom desk drawer. Then she made a note in the household ledger, not about Thomas, just the date and the morning's tasks, and went to the kitchen to help Dot with breakfast. Nathan found out about the letter when she told him at supper. He read it, set it down, and said, "Good." That was all. It was Anna had come to understand exactly the right amount to say. The weeks that followed had a quality she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten it had a name. Ordinary. The days were ordinary in the way that only becomes possible when the extraordinary threat has passed, when you can wake up in the morning and the first thing your mind does is not run a threat assessment, but simply register that it is morning and there is work to do, and the people you love are in the next room. Samuel was pulling himself upright now, using the edge of the padded crate, using the chair legs, using Nathan's boot, when Nathan was sitting at the table and not paying sufficient attention. He had discovered that falling down was not the catastrophe it initially appeared to be, and could in fact be repeated indefinitely, as long as someone nearby made the appropriate sounds of encouragement, which Dot did with the consistency of someone who had decided this was her primary function and was executing it at a high level. "He's going to walk before spring," Dot announced one morning, watching Samuel haul himself up the side of the kitchen table with an expression of total conviction. "He's been saying that for a month," Nathan said. "He's been doing it for a month," Dot said. "There's a difference." Samuel looked at Nathan across the table with the serious, evaluating gaze of a person who has not yet learned to disguise what he is thinking, and then he said something that was not quite a word, but had the structure and intention of one, and Nathan said without looking away from him, "He's going to be a talker." "He's already a talker," Anna said. "He just hasn't learned our language yet." Nathan looked at her, the cousin of a smile, closer again. The wedding was quiet. Anna had not wanted anything that required the town to perform approval of something that didn't belong to the town, and Nathan had not wanted anything that required him to stand in front of a large group of people and be regarded. And so what they did was ride into Millhaven on a Tuesday morning in March with Dot and Holt as witnesses, and Samuel on Anna's hip, and the circuit preacher who came through every 6 weeks, and they stood in the preacher's borrowed parlor and said the words that needed saying. The preacher, A thin man with a kind face named Reverend Albright looked at Samuel partway through and said with the gentle humor of a man accustomed to the varieties of human arrangement, "Is this young man participating?" "He is," Nathan said. Samuel, who had been examining the button on Anna's sleeve with scientific intensity, looked up at the sound of Nathan's voice with an expression of complete trust, which was, Anna thought, watching it happen, the most precise definition of family she had ever seen. After, on the ride back, Holt said, "Well, that's done then." "That's done," Nathan agreed. Dot said from the back of the wagon, "I've been at that ranch 11 years, and you've been alone 9 of them, and I want it known that I consider this overdue." "It's noted," Nathan said. "I'm putting it in the record," Dot said. "What record?" Anna said. "The record I keep in my head," Dot said. "It's very thorough." Anna laughed. She laughed the way she hadn't laughed in long enough that the sound surprised her, full and unguarded. The kind that comes from somewhere below the part of you that monitors how you present yourself to the world. Nathan looked over at her when she laughed, and his expression was the one she had no adequate word for, the one that was beyond the cousin of a smile, the one that lived in his eyes rather than his mouth, the one that was simply and entirely real. It was Clara Pemberton who first told her what people in town were saying. Clara had become, over the months since the hearing, something close to a friend, the practical, direct kind of friend that suited Anna's particular nature, the kind who said the true thing without wrapping it in consideration for how the true thing might land. She came out to the ranch one afternoon in April with a dress she was altering for Anna and stayed for coffee and said without ceremony, "People are talking about you differently now." Anna looked up from the ledger. "Differently how?" "The way they talk about someone they respect," Clara said. "Not everyone. Thomas still has his people. There are men in this valley who'll defend him until they're in the ground, because that's the kind of men they are." She paused. "But the women. The women talk about you the way they talk about someone who did something they didn't know could be done." Anna put down her pen. "What did I do?" Clara looked at her. "You came in with nothing, and you told the truth, and you made it stick," she said. "Do you know how often that works?" "Once," Anna said. "Apparently." "Exactly," Clara said. "So people are paying attention." What people's attention meant practically was that the coal ranch occupied a different place in the valley's social geography than it had before January. It had always been respected. Nathan's land and Nathan's reputation were established facts that didn't require Anna's contribution to sustain them. But there was a difference she began to notice between a ranch that is respected and a ranch that is alive. The coal ranch in the months following the hearing and the wedding became the second kind. It started with small things. A neighboring rancher's wife came to ask Anna about the account management system she'd developed, having heard about it from her husband, who'd heard about it from Nathan. Anna spent an afternoon explaining it, and the woman left with 3 pages of notes and an expression of someone who had just discovered that a problem she'd accepted as permanent was actually solvable. 2 weeks later, she came back with her neighbor, and Anna spent another afternoon. It was not planned. It was not a business. It was simply what happened when a person who was good at a particular thing was asked about it by people who needed it, and Anna said yes instead of no. And the circle of yeses grew in the way that circles grow when you're not watching them, slowly and then suddenly. Nathan noticed without commenting on it. He noticed the way he noticed most things, by incorporating it into his understanding and proceeding accordingly. What he said one evening when Anna came back from Clara's shop, where she'd spent the afternoon helping Clara redesign her pricing ledger, was, "You're good at this." "At what?" she said. "Showing people how to see their own situation more clearly," he said. "You did it with Crane. You did it with Hale's wife. You do it with anyone who comes out here." He paused. "You did it with me." She looked at him. "What did I show you?" I was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, not the hat brim rotation of active deliberation, just the ordinary fidgeting of a man choosing words. "That the ranch being quiet wasn't the same as the ranch being full," he said. "That I'd gotten used to the quiet because it was safe, and I'd forgotten that safe and full are 2 different things." He looked at her. "You made it full," he said. "You and Samuel." She didn't say anything for a moment. She thought about the line cabin. She thought about the tool crate lined with her coat. She thought about the morning she found the empty barn and stood in the middle of Thomas Granger's kitchen and made herself think instead of fall apart, because falling apart was not something she had the resources for, and thinking was something she had always been able to do. "I didn't come here to fill something up," she said. "I came here to survive." "I know," Nathan said. "That's why it worked." She understood what he meant. She had not arrived with the intention of becoming necessary. She had arrived with $11 and 2 letters and a child to protect, and she had done what was in front of her with the best tools available, and the life that had assembled itself around that effort was not the life she'd been promised by Thomas Granger's letters. But it was. She knew this, the way she knew weather in her body, before she knew it in her mind, the truest thing she had ever lived inside. The twist when it came from the direction she'd stopped watching. It came in May, when Samuel was 9 months old, and hauling himself along the porch railing on his own 2 feet, with the focused determination of someone who has decided that walking is the priority, and the rest of the world can wait. It came in a letter, but not from Thomas. It was from a man named Gerald Whitaker, her father-in-law, Samuel's paternal grandfather. The merchant family in Columbus that had paid to make the situation uncomplicated. She had not heard from them since the morning she returned the money. She had not expected to. She sat with the letter for a moment before opening it, aware that Nathan was in the barn, and Dot was in the kitchen, and Samuel was on the porch, and she was alone with whatever this was, which felt appropriate. The letter was from Gerald Whitaker, and it said that his son Samuel's father had died in February. Pneumonia. He said this plainly without asking for her sympathy, which she respected. He said that he had spent the months since February in the kind of reckoning that loss forces on a person, and that one of the things he had reckoned with was the money they had paid her and the arrangement they had made and the child he had never met. He said he did not expect forgiveness and was not requesting it. He said he would like if she was willing to know that the boy existed and was well. He had included at the bottom of the letter a banker's draft for an amount that was, she read it twice, significant. Enough to fund Samuel's education through to university if invested properly. He said this was not payment and not reparation. He said it was for the boy. Anna put the letter down. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the merchant's son in Columbus, and the word uncomplicated, and the money she'd handed back, because she'd decided that she and Samuel would be the authors of their own story, and not supporting characters in someone else's arrangement. She thought about what it meant that the grandfather, the man who had organized the original removal, was now reaching toward the child he'd helped exile with money and a letter, and the careful phrasing of a person who knows they have no standing to ask for anything but is asking anyway. She thought about what Samuel deserved, not from Gerald Whitaker specifically, just in general, what he deserved from the world. When Nathan came in from the barn, she handed him the letter without a word. He read it. He set it on the table. He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Not what do you think or what should we do? What do you want?" The same question she realized he had been asking her in various forms since the morning he'd found her in the line cabin, not telling her what her situation required of her, but giving her the space to determine that herself. "I want to write him back," she said. "I want to tell him Samuel is well. I want to tell him Samuel has a father." She paused. "And I want to keep the money for Samuel. Not because I can't provide for him, I can, and I will, but because Samuel is owed something from that family, and this is the form it's taking, and he shouldn't have to pay for his grandfather's choices by refusing what's legitimately his." Nathan nodded. "Write the letter," he said. She wrote it that evening. It was one of the hardest letters she'd written, not because she didn't know what to say, but because what she wanted to say was large, and the letter needed to be precise, and the distance between large and precise is the hardest distance in writing to cross. She wrote that Samuel was well. She wrote that he was loved. She wrote that he had a father who had chosen him deliberately without obligation, and that this was in her experience rarer and more valuable than the kind that arrives by accident. She wrote that she accepted the money on Samuel's behalf, and that she expected nothing further. She wrote that she hoped Gerald Whitaker found some peace in knowing that the choice his family had made, however cruel its intention, had ended in something real. She sealed the letter and put it in the Morning Post stack and went out to the porch where Nathan was sitting with Samuel in his lap. Samuel had his hands on Nathan's forearms, using them as rails, and he was actually standing weight on both feet, without holding on to anything else for the space of about 4 seconds, before he sat down hard on Nathan's knee and looked enormously pleased with himself. Nathan looked at Anna. "Did you see that?" "I saw," she said. 4 seconds, Nathan said. "At least 4, she agreed. Samuel looked at both of them with the expression he had when he knew he'd done something worth repeating, and then he stood up again, and this time he made it to 6. It was in that moment, Samuel standing on Nathan's knee in the last light of a May evening, Anna sitting beside them on the porch step, that Nathan said the thing he had been carrying for a long time. She knew he'd been carrying it because she'd learned to read the particular quality of his silences, and this one had been building for weeks. "I thought I was done," he said. "After Eleanor and the baby. I thought that was it. That was the shape of my life, and I had made my peace with it." He was looking at Samuel, not at her, which was how Nathan said the things that required the most from him. "And then I found you in a line cabin in 12-degree weather, talking to a frozen baby about mountains, and I thought—" He stopped, turned his coffee cup. "I thought that is a woman who is not done, and something about that made me realize I wasn't either." Anna looked at him. "Eleanor," she said. It was the first time she'd heard Nathan say his wife's name. "Eleanor," he said. "And the baby was a girl. We called her May." He paused. "I don't talk about them." "I know," Anna said. "I don't talk about them because talking about them makes the absence very loud," he said, "and I learned to live with it quiet." He looked at her. "You make it possible to live with it loud sometimes. I don't know if you know what that is worth." She did know. She knew because she had her own loud absences. The merchant's son, the word uncomplicated, the 2,000 miles of railroad she'd crossed on a promise that turned out to be nothing. You didn't get over those things. You got larger than them slowly by building something real around the space they left. "Eleanor would have liked you," Nathan said. "She was direct. She didn't tolerate nonsense." He paused. "She would have put Dot and Clara Pemberton together, and the 3 of them would have run the entire North Valley by now." Anna laughed. "I'll tell Clara that." "She'll believe it," Nathan said. Samuel, who had been standing and sitting and standing again with increasing confidence during this entire conversation, suddenly took a step. One full, unassisted forward step. His arms wide for balance. His face wearing the expression of someone who has just discovered something enormous and can't quite believe it happened to them. He wobbled. He took another step. He reached Nathan's boot and grabbed it with both hands and held on and looked up with an expression of absolute triumph. Nathan looked down at him. Then he looked at Anna. And what was on his face was not the cousin of a smile or the quiet thing in his eyes or any of the careful, controlled expressions she'd learned to read across 8 months of mornings and evenings and courtroom hours and letters. It was something much simpler. It was a man who had been alone for 7 years, watching a child take his first steps and understanding in the specific language of the body that bypasses all the careful thinking that he was not alone anymore. "There you go," Nathan said to Samuel very quietly. "There you go." Anna watched her son standing at Nathan Cole's boot in the last of the May light, and she thought about Ohio, and about train windows, and about the mountains she had described to a freezing baby, because she had decided there was still something worth describing. She thought about the line cabin, and the folder of careful documents, and the courtroom, and Crane's closed folder, and the 6 people who had come when she asked. She thought about what Clara had said, you did something they didn't know could be done. She had not known either when she started. She had only known that she was going to try, and that trying required honesty and documentation, and the willingness to say the true thing out loud, in rooms where the true thing was not the socially convenient thing, and that the people who were watching, who were always watching in any community, for someone to be honest first, would follow if she gave them somewhere to follow to. She had given them somewhere, and in doing so she had given herself somewhere too. Summer came to the valley, the way Montana summers come decisively, with the kind of light that doesn't waste itself on subtlety. The ranch filled with the sounds of a working season, The hands in the barn. The cattle on the North Range. Dot's voice carrying from the kitchen through the open windows. Samuel's increasingly confident commentary on everything he encountered. He was walking by June. Not the careful, deliberate walking of someone who knows they might fall, but the forward, committed walking of someone who has decided that falling is an acceptable cost of speed. Nathan watched him cross the porch one morning in June and said, "He walks like you." "Like me," Anna said. "Like he knows where he's going, and he's already decided he'll get there," Nathan said. She thought about that. She thought about the version of herself who had stepped off the train in Montana Territory in January, with her bag and her $11 and her 6-month-old son, and her careful, practical hope that a man's written words meant what they said. That woman had not known where she was going. She had known only that wherever she was going to get there, and that Samuel was going to be warm and fed and safe when she arrived. She had arrived, and what she'd found on the other side of the worst winter of her life was not the home Thomas Granger had promised her in letters she'd read 3 times each. It was better than that. It was a home she had built piece by piece from what was true, from documented evidence and honest testimony, and the particular courage that is not dramatic but just relentless. The courage that does the next necessary thing, and then the one after that, and does not stop because stopping is not one of the available options. The letter from Edmund Carr's office arrived in July, informing her that Thomas Granger had indeed left the territory, and that the legal matters were fully and finally closed. Foster had included a personal note that said simply, "Well done." Anna read it, put it in the bottom drawer with the other folder, and went back to the accounts. On a Sunday evening in late July, she and Nathan sat on the porch after supper while Samuel slept inside, and the sky went through the colors it went through in that particular valley, in that particular season, the long, extravagant Montana sunset that behaved as though it had something to prove. Dot had gone to visit her sister in Millhaven. The hands were in the bunkhouse. The ranch was quiet in the way it was quiet on Sunday evenings, which was a different kind of quiet from the isolation Nathan had lived in for 9 years, full, rather than empty, chosen, rather than defaulted to. "I've been thinking," Nathan said. "About what?" Anna said. "About the spring cattle contracts," he said. "I think we should expand the North Range operation. Garrett's quarter share is going to be available again. He's overextended and he knows it. If we move on it now, before the fall sales, we can set the terms." Anna looked at him. "You want to buy the property Thomas used to escape to?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "Think of it that way for a second," she said. He considered it. "Yes," he said. "I still want to buy it. The land is good. The water access is solid. And if we own it, there's no one on that range who doesn't belong there." He paused. "Is that a problem?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about whether Thomas Granger still had the power to make her decisions complicated by proximity, even from a different territory. She found that he did not. He had had that power once in the line cabin in the first weeks at the ranch and the courtroom, but she had reduced it steadily and deliberately by insisting on the true account of things until the true account was the only account anyone was using. "I was just a man now, a man who had left." "No," she said. "Draw up the terms." "I'll need a contract letter," Nathan said. "I'll write it tomorrow," she said. He reached over without looking at her and took her hand, and they sat like that in the diminishing light with the sounds of the ranch around them, and Samuel asleep inside, and the North Range spreading out beyond the fence line, waiting for whatever came next. Anna thought about Dot's 11 years, and Nathan's 9 of quiet, and Samuel's 9 months of getting steadily larger and more opinionated, and she thought about the 7 pages of careful truth she'd written on a clean page of the household ledger and labeled "What I Know to Be True," and she thought about the woman who had braided her hair twice on the morning of the hearing. The first time too tight, the second time just right, because small things either anchor you or unmoor you, and she had made a policy. She had made several policies, it turned out. Policies about truth and documentation, and saying the true thing in rooms where it was inconvenient. Policies about choosing rather than accepting, and earning rather than receiving, and asking for help from the people who were already holding things and waiting to be asked. She had arrived in Montana with nothing that anyone would have counted as an advantage. She had built a life anyway, not from what she'd been given, but from what she refused to give up. That was the whole of it. That was enough. And in the coal ranch at the edge of a Montana valley, with the summer going gold around them and a child sleeping inside, who would grow up knowing exactly what his mother had done, and exactly what it had cost, and exactly what it had been worth. Anna Whitaker. Cole understood that the woman who had stepped off the train in January, frightened and practical and absolutely unwilling to be defeated, had not been rescued by the life she found here. She had built it, with her own hands, and it would stand.